St. Louis.
CBS News, I'm Mike Pulsifer. There have been yet more hostilities in the Persian Gulf involving U.S. and Iranian forces. The latest now from the Pentagon and CBS News correspondent Deborah Potter.
Another Iranian frigate has been attacked by U.S. warplanes in the Persian Gulf. The Pentagon says the Iranian frigate fired on a U.S. intruder aircraft that was providing cover for U.S. ships. The aircraft returned fire and hit the Iranian frigate with a single laser-guided bomb. According to the Pentagon, the ship was down by the stern as darkness fell in the area. The Pentagon says there is no intention of renewing attacks on that Iranian ship unless that ship exhibits further hostile intent. Now, this is the third Iranian ship that's been attacked today. Another one was last reported on fire after being hit with missiles and laser-guided bombs from 3 U.S. aircraft and 1 U.S. ship. This occurred after the Iranian ship refused to heed warnings to turn back as it approached U.S. ships and then fired on one of the overflying U.S. aircraft. The attacks have been going on all day since early this morning. American ships attacked and destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms. That action ordered by President Reagan in retaliation for the incident last week when an American Navy ship was heavily damaged by a mine that U.S. officials now say was laid by the Iranians. Deborah Potter, CBS News at the Pentagon.
Congressional leaders were told in advance of the U.S. attacks on the Iranian oil facilities. Senate Minority Leader Robert Dole.
I and other members of the congressional leadership were consulted last evening on the planned mission against Iranian targets, well before the mission was underway. I indicated my support for that planned action as a fully justified response to Iran's continued unprovoked attacks on our vessels.
Congressional leaders of both parties say the attack is justified. Senate Majority Leader Byrd, House Speaker Wright, and the House Majority and Minority leaders all backed the action. At the United Nations, though, Soviet Ambassador Alexander Bolonogov termed the day's activities very distressing.
It complicates even further already complicated situation in the Gulf. It is very dangerous to add an American dimension to the war between Iran and Iraq.
The 3 Democrats still campaigning for their party's presidential nomination are offering qualified support for the U.S. attacks. Michael Dukakis called it a measured response. Albert Gore says it's a proportional response. And Jesse Jackson says defending...
If you think about it, we probably talk about it. Information you can use. Grow with 1120 KMOX Radio, St. Louis. It's 1 o'clock.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller.
We've taken this action to make certain the Iranians have no illusions about the cost of irresponsible behavior. We aim to deter further Iranian aggression, not provoke it. They must know that we will protect our ships, and if they threaten us, they'll pay a price.
President Reagan explaining the reason for U.S. action against Iranian facilities and naval forces in the Persian Gulf today. The U.S. Navy has attacked another Iranian ship, the latest in a round of retaliatory strikes that began earlier today with the U.S. attack on Iranian oil platforms. The president took that action to punish Iran for planting the mine that hit a U.S. frigate last week. Deborah Potter has more on the latest incident.
It was the second major incident in the aftermath of the U.S. attack on 2 Iranian oil platforms. The Pentagon says an Iranian frigate fired on a U.S. Navy warplane that was flying cover for American ships in the area. The fighter fired back with a laser-guided bomb and hit the frigate. As darkness fell, the Iranian ship appeared to be taking on water at the stern as tugboats moved in to help. Earlier, another frigate was set on fire and apparently suffered heavy damage when it was hit by bombs and missiles from 3 U.S. planes and a ship. The Pentagon says that frigate had ignored a warning to stay clear of American vessels and then fired at one of the American planes. According to Pentagon officials, the Iranians had only 2 frigates in operating condition, and both are now out of commission. So far, officials say they have no reports of American casualties, and they are not providing any details about Iranians killed or wounded in the attacks. But each frigate normally carries a crew of 125, and it appears certain that some Iranian casualties were sustained. Deborah Potter, CBS News, the Pentagon.
In New York City, where the 3 Democratic candidates are campaigning on the eve of the critical New York State primary, Jesse Jackson said today's fighting in the Persian Gulf raises new questions about U.S. policy in the Gulf. Jackson said the weapons used against the Americans were, quote, no doubt sold to Iran illegally by the Reagan administration. An Israeli court has convicted John Demjanjuk of Nazi war crimes, ruling that the former U.S. auto worker had been a brutal guard at Treblinka. Lawrence Rifkin reports.
The prosecution's case against John Demjanjuk had been quite impressive, while the defense had reeled through a number of serious setbacks over the course of the 14-month trial. But Demjanjuk attorney John Gill said he was astonished by the scope of the verdict, as read for more than 10 hours by the three-judge panel.
Every single point that was raised, the court has ruled for them and against us on every single point. It's astonishing.
The judges gave much weight to the testimony of 5 Treblinka death camp survivors who identified Demjanjuk as having been a brutal Treblinka guard known as Ivan the Terrible. They rejected Demjanjuk's alibi that he had been in German POW camps instead. They also played down the importance of an alleged ID card, which the prosecutors said tied Demjanjuk to the Nazis, but which the defense said was a forgery. Lawrence Rifkin for CBS News, Jerusalem.
At 3.
St. Louis.
CBS News, this is Judy Muller. It's been a day of attack and counterattack in the Persian Gulf. The U.S. Navy destroyed 2 offshore Iranian oil platforms as a response to the Iranian mine that damaged a U.S. frigate last week. The Iranians fought back, firing at U.S. naval forces. And in retaliation, the Americans sank an Iranian patrol boat and bombed 2 Iranian Navy frigates. President Reagan said, if they threaten us, they'll pay a price, adding,
a more normal relationship with Iran is desirable, and we're prepared for it. But such a relationship is not possible so long as Iran attacks neutral ships, threatens its neighbors, supports terrorism, and refuses to end the bloody war with Iraq.
The White House says the Iranian oil platform served as bases of operation for Revolutionary Guards, who were given several minutes warning before the attack took place. According to a Tunisian inquiry, the assassination of a PLO military chief was carried out by Israel. The PLO official was shot to death in his Tunis home by a team of commandos. Most Israeli leaders have declined comment. State Department spokesman Charles Redmond today had this U.S. reaction.
The United States condemns this act of political assassination. Violence is not the solution to the problems of the Middle East. The United States government had no knowledge of, nor was it involved in any way in this assassination.
An Israeli court has ruled that former Ohio auto worker John Demjanjuk was the Nazi death camp guard known as Ivan the Terrible. The court convicted Demjanjuk of 4 counts of war crimes. He will be sentenced next week and could get the death penalty. Throughout the trial, Demjanjuk insisted it was a case of mistaken identity and that he had never served at the Treblinka death camp. It's down to the wire for the 3 Democratic candidates slugging it out for the large pot of delegates at stake in tomorrow's critical New York primary. Rob Armstrong has been monitoring the Jackson campaign.
While Jackson's aides are saying they expect him to do well here tomorrow, Jackson himself concedes that this has been a difficult leg of the campaign. Jackson refused to discuss New York Mayor Edward Koch in his statement that Jackson is a liar. He said he would not dignify the charge by reacting directly to it, but he certainly approached it indirectly.
In New York, there has been more divisive language than any other state or region in the country. No leaders across the South raised a race or a litmus test as a basis relating to our campaign.
Jackson also said he has received more death threats here than in any other state.
St. Louis. CBS News, I'm Christopher Glenn. What's been the cost of a series of engagements between U.S. and Iranian military forces in the Persian Gulf? Defense Secretary Frank Carlucci briefed reporters a short while ago. Correspondent Deborah Potter was there.
Defense Secretary Carlucci says that so far there are no confirmed reports of American casualties from the day's engagements. But he revealed that a U.S. helicopter with 2 crewmen aboard is more than an hour overdue returning to base. Navy officials say they have no indication that the helicopter was involved in hostilities, but they are concerned about its fate. Carlucci says that as far as the United States is concerned, the hostilities in the Gulf are over, unless the Iranians decide differently.
We hope Iran will now realize the futility of its attempts to interfere with peaceful international shipping in the Persian Gulf. We do not seek a confrontation with Iran, but we do intend to continue our efforts to ensure freedom of navigation in the Gulf.
Carlucci said the U.S. hopes that tomorrow will bring peace in the Gulf. But in his words, should Iran resume its attacks, we are prepared to defend ourselves. So far, he said, there is no plan to send in reinforcements, noting that the U.S. has enough firepower in the Gulf now to do the job. Deborah Potter, CBS News at the Pentagon.
President Reagan used a previously scheduled speech to talk about the action in the Gulf. The president said that we will protect our ships, and if they threaten us, they'll pay a price. Adding, we undertook this action to make sure the Iranians have no illusions about the cost of irresponsible behavior.
April 19th, 1988.
You think about it. We probably talk about it. Information you can use. Grow with 1120 KMOX Radio, St. Louis.
8 o'clock in St. Louis.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. The Persian Gulf seems to have settled back to what passes for normal in that part of the world. No further clashes between U.S. and Iranian forces. Correspondent Mark Phillips in the Gulf says Iran's gunboats have struck at another merchant vessel.
They attacked a small tanker in the Straits of Hormuz at the entrance to the Gulf. The tanker was set on fire and the crew has abandoned ship. That appears to be the only action so far in the Gulf, a much quieter day here, of course, than it was yesterday.
When U.S. forces destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms and Iran struck back with little success. Phillips says one attempt involved the first firing of Silkworm missiles against U.S. warships.
The American ships fired radar-deflecting chaff into the air and took violent avoiding action. The missiles all missed their target, some of them falling into the sea, one of them hitting into an oil platform nearby. It's the first time, as I say, the Iranians have used that missile, although it has been known that they have had batteries of Silkworm missiles on station at various points around the Gulf.
Iran claims to have shot down a U.S. helicopter during yesterday's action. That has not been confirmed by the Navy, which says only that the chopper is missing, along with 2 crewmen. There's a search underway. A lull in the 2-week-old Kuwaiti airliner hijacking seems to have broken today. We have an update from correspondent Bill McLaughlin.
For the first time in several days, it seems as if the terrorists holding the Kuwaiti jet and its passengers hostage here at Algiers airport may have begun significant talks with the Algerian government's top negotiator. He went to the aircraft early this afternoon. He stayed just about 10 minutes, then sped back to the VIP parking area where he went into a special communications van that's used for relaying important messages to Algeria's president. At the same time, a leading Kuwait newspaper is predicting today that the hostage crisis will end within 24 hours. Well, there's nothing here really to support all that, but there does appear to be something going on. No one here knows quite what, but something that might eventually be good news for the hostages. This is, after all, the beginning of their 3rd week. Bill McLaughlin, CBS News, at Algiers Airport.
Thank you.
9 o'clock.
CBS News, I'm Bill Whitney. A French warship operating in the south-central Persian Gulf reports that it's discovered 3 more mines today. It was Iranian mining last week that prompted yesterday's U.S. attack on 2 of Iran's oil platforms. President Reagan was going into a meeting with congressional leaders this morning when reporters at the White House asked him about the situation today.
The only statement I have to make today is that things seem to be quieting down in the Gulf. We hope it continues that way, and the main purpose of this meeting today is to talk about the trade bill.
Do you have any news about the missing helicopter?
Well, I have to answer that in the sense that there are 9 ships right now trying to find the answer to that.
Well, Iran says it shot the helicopter down in a state of all-out war now.
Well, ask them questions whether they mean it or not.
Did we underestimate Iran's response?
No.
Mr. President, is the action over as far as the United States is concerned, or do we plan further action against Iran?
I just told you that it seems to be quieting down. We hope it continues that way.
There has been one incident, a reported attack by Iranian gunboats on a tanker flying the flag of the United Arab Emirates. U.S. forces in the Gulf continue to search for a missing Navy helicopter and its 2 crewmen. Iran claims to have shot that chopper down during yesterday's skirmishes. New developments now at the airport in Algiers, where that hijacked Kuwaiti airliner still sits on the tarmac.
There is movement here at Algiers Airport, although at the moment no one really knows what it all means. The terrorists say they want to issue a statement to the press and are expected to do so very soon. Meanwhile, several police vans have moved out near the plane, and an executive jet belonging to the Algerian president's fleet just landed here. Earlier today, Kuwait's leading newspaper, Al-Kabas, quotes unnamed sources to predict that the hijack will end peacefully within 24 hours. More concretely, an Algerian official met with the terrorists earlier this afternoon, then sped to a communications van used to relay important messages to the Algerian president. The waiting goes on, but this time, the waiting may be adding up to something. Bill McLaughlin, CBS News at Algiers Airport.
We'll be back tomorrow morning starting at 5. Grant's next, 10 o'clock. Have a good day.
CBS News, this is Doug Poling. Reports of more mines in the Persian Gulf. A French warship radioed to an American naval vessel that 3 mines were spotted in the south central Gulf. The conversation went like this.
French warship, this is U.S. warship. I copy the mine report from you. Can you amplify? How many mines? What type mines? Over.
Okay, that's 3 mines, M08 type, 1 on the surface, and 2 under the water, 2 meters round. Over.
It was suspected mining of the Gulf by Iran that led to yesterday's U.S. attack on Iranian oil platforms. At the White House this morning, President Reagan said he thinks the Persian Gulf situation is calming down. Jacqueline Adams reports.
Responding to reporters' questions, Mr. Reagan indicated that this morning's meeting with GOP congressional leaders would not dwell on yesterday's sea battles with the Iranians.
Things seem to be quieting down in the Gulf. We hope it continues that way, and the main purpose of this meeting today is to talk about the trade bill.
However, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff was on hand to brief the congressman, and the president voiced concern about a missing Cobra attack helicopter and its 2-man crew.
There are 9 ships right now trying to find the answer to that.
There's been bipartisan support for the president's decision to punish Iran for its renewed attacks on international shipping in the Gulf. Though Pentagon officials were surprised by the ferocity of the Iranian response, Mr. Reagan this morning insisted he and his military planners had not underestimated Iran. Jacqueline Adams, CBS News, the White House.
The Iran-Iraq war goes on. Iraq today fired missiles into Tehran and other Iranian cities. Iranian warplanes blasted the Foul Peninsula, which the Iraqis claim to have recaptured in a land offensive. It's the day for New Yorkers to express their choices for president. The weather is good. The turnout may be heavy as the Empire State holds its presidential primary.
Our call for action lines are now open. Call 421-1975. Call for action. It's a service of KMOX Radio.
CBS News, I'm Bill Lynch. With President Reagan saying he hopes today's relative quiet continues in the Persian Gulf, U.S. rescue teams are still searching for 2 Marine helicopter crewmen missing since yesterday's naval clashes. Iran claims it shot down that gunship, and Tehran reports today at least 15 Iranians killed in yesterday's fierce battles. Today, Iranian gunboats attacked the United Arab Emirates motor tanker, setting it afire and forcing its crew to abandon ship. Former Navy Secretary James Webb today criticized President Reagan's retaliation orders as too little, too late.
The administration's action was very low-key, in my view, too low-key, and it was the commanders on the scene who picked up the indications of hostile intent and did to the Iranian Navy what should have been done, in my view, 5 months ago.
The American press pool on the frigate Jack Williams reported Iran, for the first time, fired 5 Chinese-made Silkworm missiles at a U.S. warship. They reported the Williams shot up chaff clouds to fool their radar guidance, with 4 missiles crashing into the water, a 5th hitting an oil rig. But after a White House briefing by Joint Chiefs Chairman William Crowell, House GOP leader Bob Michael said this morning he shot down that report.
The specific comment by Admiral Crowell that those press reports of silkworms being used were erroneous.
Officials now say the Silkworm incoming warning heard on the U.S. frigate may have been an all-purpose missile alert for vessels sailing within range of Iran's Silkworm batteries. Israel has given more Palestinians a one-way ride into Lebanon. Lawrence Rifkin reports.
The 8 men expelled today were flown by Air Force helicopter to Israel's self-imposed buffer zone just across the Lebanese border. From there, they made their way north in the direction of Lebanon's Syrian-controlled sector. The 8 were ordered deported just over a week ago, the same day Israel expelled 8 other Palestinians. Today's deportees had canceled their appeal to protest the Israeli system which enables the expulsions. 6 of today's deportees came from the West Bank village of Beta, where they were accused of having actively participated in a fatal clash with Jewish settlers 2 weeks ago. Lawrence Rifkin for CBS News, Jerusalem.
Still no break in the Kuwait Airways hijacking, now in its 3rd week. Some of those aboard the plane in Algiers are suffering now from diarrhea. An early morning tornado ripped through the center of Madison, Florida, leaving 4 people dead, 10 seriously injured. It left severe damage on the North Florida Junior College campus, a shopping center, and in residential areas.
CBS News, this is Doug Poling. Some details from the Pentagon on what did and did not happen in yesterday's Persian Gulf battles. Deborah Potter reports.
Pentagon officials say they can't confirm a report that the Iranians used Silkworm missiles during yesterday's hostilities, which would have been a major escalation of the violence. Spokesman Dan Howard says 1 American ship within range of the Silkworm batteries was fired on 5 times and assumed the worst-case scenario.
There were missile tracks all over the place based on the
information that we have evaluated thus far, we have, quote, no positive evidence to indicate that silkworms were fired.
The Pentagon also reports that 2 Marine captains are now considered missing and unaccounted for in the Gulf. Their helicopter did not return from a surveillance mission yesterday. Search and rescue operations continue for Stephen Leslie and Kenneth Hill, who were based at New River, North Carolina. Deborah Potter, CBS News at the Pentagon.
A French warship in the Gulf today reported sighting 3 more mines in the water. Suspected mining by Iran led to yesterday's U.S. attack on Iranian oil platforms. And President Reagan says it seems to be quieting down in the Gulf, and in his words, we hope it continues that way. The president spoke briefly to reporters this morning as he went into a meeting with Republican members of Congress. The biggest block of convention delegates to date is up for grabs. It's the day of the New York State primary, considered very important to presidential hopefuls Michael Dukakis, Jesse Jackson, and Albert Gore. As they left the voting booth this morning in New York City, some of the people spoke to reporters.
I voted for Dukakis because I believe that his presidential campaign is one that'll make a significance in our country.
I voted for Jesse Jackson, and I'm not a very political person. I actually haven't voted since 1976.
I voted for Gore because I'm not really impressed with either of the others.
Of the Persian Gulf and in the air over it, U.S. ships and helicopters are searching for the missing combat helicopter which disappeared during yesterday's fighting between U.S. and Iranian forces. 2 men were on board.
They are Captain Stephen C. Leslie and Captain Kenneth W. Hill. They were from Squadron HMLA 167 of Marine Corps Air Station, New River, North Carolina.
Pentagon spokesman Dan Howard, Iran claimed the helicopter had been shot down.
The Iranians did not make that claim until after we had confirmed the fact that the helicopter was missing. You take that for what it's worth. We still have a search and rescue operation underway.
The Pentagon is still investigating a report 5 land-based silkworm missiles were fired at U.S. ships during yesterday's battles, in which American forces destroyed 2 Iranian oil platforms and hit 6 Iranian ships. No new clashes reported between U.S. and Iranian forces, President Reagan saying the area seems to be quieting down. Correspondent Richard Wagner was a witness to the day after.
In more than 5 hours of flying over the southern Gulf today, we saw a large concentration of U.S. warships, perhaps the heaviest concentration in this part of the Gulf at any time. We also saw burning in the water a small tanker of the United Arab Emirates, which was carrying bunker fuel. The presumption is that it was set ablaze by a Iranian gunboat, but we did not see the Iranian gunboat. Tugboats were on the scene, spraying water on the blaze, and as we were there hovering, the blaze was controlled and crewmen returned to the ship.
That ship, the 12,000-ton tanker, the crew rescued by Omani patrol boats, there also were new reports of mines spotted in the Gulf waters. One witness said it came with a roar, a killing churn of a storm assaulting and battering a small community in North Florida. Rick Flagg reports from Madison.
The tornado that hit Madison this morning cut a 10-mile path of destruction, snapping pine trees and power poles, casting debris through streets and on top of homes. Alton Phillips was one of the lucky ones. Most of the trees in his yard were toppled, but the twister skipped right over his home and family.
Jack Buck and Mike Shannon here on the Sports Voice of America, KMOX Radio, St. Louis.
CBS News, I'm Dick Reeves. Quieting down, that's how President Reagan described the Persian Gulf today, adding, and we hope it continues that way. Quieting down, yes, but quiet, no. U.S. Naval and Air Force units are searching for a combat helicopter missing since yesterday's U.S.-Iranian air-sea clashes. The Pentagon identifies the 2 Marine captains on board as Stephen Leslie, New Bern, North Carolina, and Kenneth Hill of Thomasville, North Carolina. There are stories of more mines bobbing about in the Gulf waters, and reports 2 tankers were attacked by the Iranians in the Strait of Hormuz, leading into the Gulf. The Defense Department is still trying to determine if Iran fired silkworm missiles during yesterday's battles, as has been reported. 2 Iranian oil platforms were destroyed, and 6 Iranian vessels were hit during the fighting. Abbas Hamadi has been sentenced to 13 years in prison by a West German court after being found guilty of kidnapping, coercion, and possessing explosives. Hamadi accused in connection with the abduction of 2 West Germans in Beirut as ransom for his brother Mohammed. Mohammed was accused of hijacking a TWA jetliner. The sentence was tougher than prosecutors asked for, but welcomed by the U.S.
We commend today's action by the German court, which sends a clear signal to terrorists. Terrorists have been brought to justice in trials throughout the West recently. The conviction of Abbas Hamadi is part of this trend. We believe that strong punishment for terrorists is essential.
Phyllis Oakley speaking for the State Department. In one decision, the Supreme Court upheld unanimously the power of states to control gasoline prices and oil industry profits. In another ruling, the justices dashed the hopes of Northern California Indians. A story from law correspondent Rita Braver.
The dispute began in 1977 when the Forest Service announced plans to build a highway between the towns of Gasky and Orleans. The road would benefit tourists and loggers, and the Indians claimed it would bring noise and disruption to the high country near Chimney Rock, where they came to meditate and pray. Two lower courts agreed with them and blocked the road. But today, in a 5-3 decision, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor wrote that the road may go forward because the land is public and the government is not trying to coerce the individuals into violating their religious beliefs. She said the Constitution does not offer to reconcile the various competing demands on government that inevitably arise in so diverse a society as ours. But in his dissent, Justice William Brennan retorted that today's action by the court majority leaves Native Americans with absolutely no protection against perhaps the greatest threat to their religious practices. Rita Braver, CBS News at the Supreme Court.
A deadly twister in northern Florida, a tornado in the darkness just before dawn, killing at least 4 people, injuring 17 in the Madison, Florida area.